Imagine staring up at the night sky thousands of years ago, tracing the path of stars with only the naked eye, and somehow knowing secrets about the cosmos that our modern science would not uncover for centuries. This isn't science fiction, it's the reality of an ancient tribe in West Africa whose knowledge of the stars defies everything we thought we understood about human history and astronomy. At the heart of this mystery is a star system many of us recognize, Sirius, the brightest star in our night sky. But what if I told you that long before powerful telescopes confirmed its existence, a remote tribe spoke in startling detail about Sirius's invisible companion, a dense, white dwarf star called Sirius B, something impossible to see without advanced technology. Welcome to the story of the Dogon people of Mali, one of history's most perplexing and captivating enigmas. For generations, this isolated community has preserved intricate knowledge about celestial bodies they could never have observed firsthand. Their oral traditions and spiritual ceremonies describe Sirius B with eerie precision, its elliptical orbit, its 50-year cycle, even its composition as a small but incredibly heavy star. How could a culture with no written language, no astronomical instruments, and no contact with the outside world possess such specific insights into a star system that remained hidden to Western science until the late 19th century? We're about to journey deep into one of anthropology's greatest puzzles, a mystery that challenges our assumptions about ancient civilizations, the transfer of knowledge, and even the possibility of forgotten or extraterrestrial influence. Along the way, we'll explore compelling theories, from forgotten advanced human cultures to unexpected interstellar visitors, and weigh the astonishing implications of what the Dogon people knew. This isn't just a story about stars, it's about the limits of human understanding and the thrilling possibility that history might be far stranger and more wonder-filled than we ever imagined. So settle in, open your mind, and join me as we unravel the secrets of the Dogon and their impossible knowledge of Sirius B. To understand the depth of this mystery, we first need to journey to the heart of West Africa, to the breathtaking and rugged landscape the Dogon call home. For centuries, they have lived in a state of remarkable isolation on the Bandiagara escarpment, a massive sandstone cliff face that stretches for over 150 kilometers across Mali. This environment is not just their home, it's a natural fortress. Their villages, often perched precariously on the cliff sides or nestled at its base, were strategically chosen for protection from historical invaders and external influences. Reaching these settlements has traditionally involved arduous climbs, a geographical seclusion that has allowed their culture to develop and remain intact, largely untouched by the outside world for generations. Their social structure is deeply intricate and spiritually rich, centered around a complex system of societies and rituals that govern every aspect of life. The Awa society, often known as the Mask Society, is responsible for organizing the elaborate Dharma ceremonies, which are funeral rites intended to guide the souls of the deceased to the ancestral world. These ceremonies feature dancers wearing stunning, multi-layered masks that can represent animals, people, or even abstract concepts, each one a masterpiece of sculpture with its own sacred meaning. This highlights a culture deeply invested in art, community, and a profound connection to the spiritual realm. Their entire worldview is animistic, believing that a life force or spirit exists not just in people and animals, but in rocks, trees, and even the weather. This spiritual framework is overseen by the Hogon, a religious patriarch who lives in seclusion and is considered the spiritual leader of the village. When you observe their daily life farming millet and onions on the harsh plateau, living in distinctive mud brick houses with pointed thatched roofs, creating intricate artwork, they appear to be a traditional pre-industrial society. There are no observatories, no telescopes, and until more recent times, no written language. Their entire history and knowledge, including their astonishing astronomical wisdom, has been preserved and passed down solely through an oral tradition of meticulously trained priests, generation after generation. This context is what makes their knowledge of the stars so utterly perplexing. To fully grasp the scale of the Dogon mystery, we must first look up and understand the star system at the center of it all. Sirius, the brightest star in our night sky, is not a single entity but actually a binary system, a cosmic dance between two very different stars. The star we see, the brilliant diamond point of light, is known as Sirius A. It is a main sequence star, larger and hotter than our own sun, and its dazzling prominence has made it a fixture in the mythology and calendars of countless cultures throughout human history. For centuries, that was the entire story as far as astronomy was concerned. But the truth, as we now know, is far more fascinating. Sirius A has a companion, a star that completely eluded scientific detection until the year 1862. This companion is Sirius B, a white dwarf star. A white dwarf is the incredibly dense, Earth-sized core of a star that has exhausted its nuclear fuel and died, collapsing in on itself under its own gravity. Imagine taking a star that was once much larger than our Sun and crushing all of its remaining mass into an object roughly the size of our planet. The result is a stellar remnant of almost unimaginable density. A single teaspoon of matter from Sirius B would weigh many tons here on Earth. This tiny, heavyweight star is locked in a vast, elliptical orbit around its brilliant partner, Sirius A. One complete orbit takes approximately 50 years. Yet despite its immense density, Sirius B emits only a faint glimmer of light, utterly overwhelmed by the blazing intensity of Sirius A. This combination of its tiny size, incredible faintness, and proximity to the brightest star in the sky is what makes Sirius B impossible to see with the naked eye. Even with the most powerful telescopes available to early modern astronomers, pinpointing it was a monumental challenge that required precise instruments and a thorough understanding of celestial mechanics to even know where to look. Its existence was first inferred through meticulous observations of a slight wobble in the motion of Sirius A, caused by the gravitational tug of its unseen partner before it was finally visually confirmed. For the Dogon to have any knowledge of this invisible companion, let alone its specific properties, represents a profound anomaly that seems to defy all conventional explanations. This profound astronomical knowledge is not a separate science for the Dogon people. It is woven into the very fabric of their spiritual identity, a cornerstone of their creation myths and their most sacred rituals. At the heart of their cosmology is the belief that their entire existence, their very purpose, is inextricably linked to the Sirius star system. They speak of a creator god named Amma who fashioned the universe and sent the Nommo to Earth. The Nommo are often described as amphibious, fish-like beings who arrived in an ark amid a great whirlwind and brought with them the seeds of civilization, language, and this profound wisdom of the stars. This event, they say, is what established their deep connection to the cosmos. Central to this spiritual framework is the star Sirius, or what they call Sigui Tolo. But their knowledge extends far beyond the bright star we can all see. They refer to Sirius B as Po Tolo. Po means a tiny seed, specifically the seed of the fonio grain, one of the world's smallest and most fundamental cereals. This name is breathtakingly accurate as it perfectly captures the essence of a white dwarf star, an object of immense density and significance contained within an incredibly small form. They knew it was made of sagala, a metal heavier than iron and brighter than gold, which again aligns strikingly with our understanding of a white dwarf's super-dense composition. Furthermore, their oral traditions describe its 50-year elliptical orbit around Sirius with precise detail, stating that it rotates on its own axis and is, as they poetically put it, the smallest and heaviest of all stars. This celestial knowledge culminates in the Sigui ceremony, the most important and secretive religious event in Dogon culture. The Sigui is not held annually or even every decade. It is celebrated only once every 60 years, a cycle that corresponds to the symbolic completion of the orbit of Potolo. This elongated time frame means that a single individual might witness this ceremony only once in their entire lifetime, if they are fortunate. The ceremony is a grand, multi-year event of renewal and commemoration, a time to honor the ancestors, the revelation of the word by the Nommo, and the very cycle of life and death itself. The preparations are immense and begin years in advance. A special council of elders, the Olubaru, is entrusted with organizing the intricate events. A central and powerful feature is the crafting of the Great Mask, an enormous serpent-like mask that can be meters long. This mask is not created from scratch each time. It is a sacred object that is repaired, repainted, and reconsecrated for the ceremony, embodying the cumulative spiritual energy of all the Sigui ceremonies that have come before it. The rituals themselves involve elaborate dances, the wearing of specific masks that represent mythological figures, and the recitation of ancient songs and poems that recount the Dogon's creation story and their celestial origins. The entire community participates in a profound act of cultural memory, ensuring that this sacred knowledge, including the precise details of the Sirius system, is passed down verbatim to the next generation. The Sigui is far more than a festival. It is a living, breathing library of astronomical data encoded in ritual, a direct generations-long observation of a cosmic clock they should have no way of seeing, let alone measuring with such exactitude. The Dogon understanding of the Sirius system is not a collection of vague star myths. It is a set of precise, technical astronomical descriptions that are unnervingly accurate. Their knowledge focuses on the companion star, which they call Potolo, the seed star. The name itself is a masterclass in accuracy. They compare this star to the fonio grain, one of the smallest seeds known to them, which is a perfect analogy for a white dwarf star, an object of immense significance compressed into an almost impossibly tiny package. They state unequivocally that this tiny star is made of a substance they call sagala, a metal they describe as the heaviest of all things. This directly mirrors our modern scientific understanding of a white dwarf's composition, a degenerate matter so incredibly dense that a single cubic inch of it would weigh thousands of tons on Earth. But their knowledge goes far beyond just its composition. The Dogon priests describe the orbit of Potolo around the primary star, Sirius A, with a level of detail that is staggering. They know that this orbit is not a perfect circle but is elliptical, meaning the distance between the two stars varies significantly over the course of their celestial dance. This is a key feature of the Sirius system that was only confirmed by astronomers after lengthy observation. Most astonishingly, they know the orbital period. Their oral traditions and the timing of their grand Sigui ceremony are based on a 50-year cycle for this orbit. The actual, scientifically measured orbital period of Sirius B is 50.1 years. The correlation is so exact that it moves beyond coincidence into the realm of the inexplicable. They even possess knowledge about the star's rotation, stating that Potolo spins on its own axis. This is another confirmed fact about white dwarfs. Many are known to be rapid rotators. For a culture without any optical aids, to know that an invisible star is both orbiting another and spinning is a depth of insight that seems to belong to the age of satellites and space telescopes, not to an ancient society living in isolation on a remote cliff face. This isn't just stargazing, it's a data set. Their descriptions provide a complete orbital mechanics profile of a celestial body they could not possibly see. A profile that matches our own scientific findings with a precision that continues to baffle historians and astronomers alike. Now, the question of how the Dogon came by this knowledge leads us directly to the very heart of their spiritual tradition and the central figures of their creation story, the Nommo. According to Dogon mythology, this profound wisdom was not painstakingly developed over millennia of naked eye observation. Instead, it was a gift delivered directly to their ancestors by visitors from the stars themselves. The Nommo are described as amphibious, fish-like beings who came from the Sirius system. They are often portrayed as having both human and piscine characteristics, upper bodies resembling humans and lower bodies ending in a fish-like tail, or sometimes with glistening, scale-covered skin. They are not portrayed as frightening invaders, but as benevolent teachers, the civilizing bringers of order, language, agriculture, and of course, the secrets of the cosmos. The account of their arrival is incredibly vivid and, to modern ears, sounds strikingly like a description of advanced space travel. The Dogon say the Nommo descended from the sky in a vast, spinning ark or vessel that was accompanied by a great whirlwind and a thunderous roar. This vessel, they recount, touched down upon the earth, scorching the land and kicking up a tremendous dust storm before finally coming to rest. When the ark opened, the Nommo emerged along with the life-giving waters that sustained them. This event is so pivotal that it is considered the true beginning of Dogon civilization, and the moment their connection to the universe was irrevocably sealed. These celestial visitors then began their great work of instruction. They imparted to the Dogon the fundamentals of social order, justice, and law. They taught them how to weave, to forge metal, and most importantly, how to cultivate the land. But their most treasured gift was the intricate astronomical knowledge concerning their place of origin, the Sirius star system. The Nommo provided the Dogon with the complete schematic of their home, describing the brilliant primary star, Sirius A, and its incredibly dense, tiny companion, Sirius B, which they called the egg of the world or the foundation of all matter. They detailed its elliptical orbit, its 50-year cycle, and its immense weight, knowledge that would become the central pillar of Dogon religion and ritual for countless generations to come. This wasn't just a lesson, it was a divine revelation, an immutable truth etched into their cultural DNA by the teachers who came from the stars. The story of the Nommo transforms the Dogon mystery from a simple question of how they knew these things into a far deeper and more provocative question about the very origins of human knowledge itself. For decades, this incredible body of knowledge existed in complete isolation, unknown to the outside world. The secret of the Dogon and their celestial wisdom might have remained hidden forever if not for the dedicated work of two French anthropologists who immersed themselves in Dogon culture during the middle of the 20th century. Marcel Griaule and Germain Dieterlen were not casual observers. They were pioneers of a method known as participant observation, which involved living within a community for extended periods, learning the language, and earning the trust necessary to access its most sacred and guarded traditions. Their work, which began in the 1930s and spanned more than 3 decades, would eventually culminate in a revelation that would send shockwaves through the scientific establishment. Griaule first arrived in the Bandiagara escarpment in 1931, leading a major ethnographic expedition. Over subsequent visits, he and Dieterlen, who became his close collaborator, developed deep, respectful relationships with the Dogon people, particularly with the elders and spiritual leaders known as the Hogon. This was no simple feat. The Dogon were, and to a large extent still are, a deeply private people protective of their spiritual knowledge, which is traditionally shared only through a gradual process of initiation. Griaule's breakthrough came in 1946 when he was granted an unprecedented honor. A blind elder and esteemed priest named Ogot merely agreed to act as his instructor, systematically unveiling the complex layers of Dogon cosmology over a series of 33 consecutive days. The sessions with Ogot merely were nothing short of revolutionary. Using an array of stones and other simple objects laid out on the ground, the elder mapped out the entire Dogon conception of the universe for the fascinated anthropologist. He detailed the creation myth involving the god Amma, explained the significance of the Nommo, and then, with stunning clarity, described the Sirius star system. He spoke of the brilliant primary star Sigui and its infinitely smaller, incredibly dense companion Tolo, which he illustrated with a tiny pebble. He described its 50-year elliptical orbit and its composition of a sacred, impossibly heavy metal. For Gryayul and Diatalon, the implications were staggering. They were hearing a precise astronomical account of a binary star system from men who had no telescopes, no written texts, and no apparent contact with the modern world. The anthropologists spent years meticulously verifying this information across different villages and with various priests, ensuring it was not an isolated belief but a central, consistent tenet of Dogon religion. They carefully documented the intricate symbolism connecting this cosmic knowledge to the Dogon's art. Their architecture, such as the layout of their granaries representing the celestial order, and their most sacred rituals like the Sigui ceremony. This painstaking research was finally compiled into their magnum opus, Le Renard Pale, or The Pale Fox, published in 1965. The book's title refers to a key mythological figure in the Dogon creation story whose chaotic actions helped shape the world, but its contents revealed a far more explosive truth. The publication of The Pale Fox landed like an academic bombshell. Western astronomers, anthropologists, and historians were utterly confounded. The specific details about Sirius B, its existence, its orbit, its density, were facts that modern science had only recently, and with great difficulty, confirmed. The idea that an ancient African tribe possessed this knowledge was not just surprising, it was, according to conventional historical models, completely impossible. It challenged the very narrative of scientific progress, forcing an uncomfortable question. How could this be? The work of Gryayul and Diatalon did not provide easy answers, but it flung open a door to one of the greatest anthropological puzzles of all time, igniting a fierce debate that continues to this day. When we step back and look at the sheer physical reality of observing Sirius B, the Dogon knowledge transforms from a curious anomaly into a genuine scientific paradox. The core of this impossibility lies in the staggering difference in brightness between the two stars. Sirius is the brightest star in our entire night sky, a brilliant beacon that has guided sailors and fascinated cultures for millennia. Its companion, Sirius B, is almost unimaginably faint in comparison. To put it in precise terms, Sirius B is 10,000 times fainter than Sirius A. Think about that for a moment. It is not just a little bit dimmer, it is utterly swamped, drowned out by the overwhelming glare of its partner. This isn't a matter of having exceptionally good eyesight or a particularly dark, clear night sky. The human eye, no matter how sharp, has physical limitations. Separating such an incredibly faint object from the blinding light of the brightest star in the heavens is simply beyond our biological capability. To even begin to have a chance of seeing it, you need technology. Not just any technology, but a powerful telescope. Astronomers generally agree that you would need a primary mirror or lens at least 8 inches in diameter to gather enough light to have any hope of resolving Sirius B from the intense glare of Sirius A. And that's just the starting point. You would also need exceptionally stable atmospheric conditions and a highly skilled observer who knew exactly where and when to look. The history of its discovery by Western science underscores just how difficult this feat was. While astronomers had theorized an unseen companion due to a slight wobble in Sirius A's motion since the 1840s, actually laying eyes on it was another matter entirely. It wasn't until January 31, 1862, that the American telescope maker Alvan Clark, while testing a brand new 18.5-inch refracting telescope, the most powerful in the world at that time, first glimpsed the elusive point of light. This was a monumental achievement, a triumph of cutting-edge 19th-century optical engineering, but seeing it was only the very first step. Understanding what it was, its true nature, took another 6 decades. For a long time, it was simply a mystery. It wasn't until the early 1920s, with the pioneering work of astronomers like Arthur Eddington on stellar evolution and the development of quantum mechanics, that scientists finally deciphered the truth. They realized this small, faint companion was not a normal star. It was a white dwarf, the incredibly dense, Earth-sized corpse of a star that had collapsed under its own gravity. An object made of degenerate matter where a single sugar cube-sized piece would weigh many tons. This fundamental understanding of its physical nature was a revolutionary breakthrough in astrophysics. Furthermore, capturing definitive proof of its existence through photography, which would eliminate any doubt or claims of optical illusion, was a challenge that persisted for over a century after its initial sighting. It wasn't until the year 1970 that astronomers were finally able to obtain a clear photographic image of Sirius B using advanced equipment and techniques. So let's summarize the timeline of Western scientific discovery. Theorized in the 1840s, first seen in 1862, understood in the 1920s, and conclusively photographed in 1970. Now contrast that with the Dogon. Their oral traditions, as documented by Grioule and Dietelen, describe this star's existence, its elliptical orbit, its 50-year cycle, its rotation, and its super-dense composition with startling accuracy. And this knowledge is not new. It is ancient, passed down through an unbroken chain of oral tradition for generations, long before Clarke's telescope or Eddington's theories. They possessed a complete data sheet on a celestial object that, by every law of physics and every account of technological history, should have been completely invisible and utterly unknowable to them. This is the heart of the enigma, a piece of the cosmic puzzle that simply does not fit, creating a mystery that challenges the very foundations of our understanding of human history. Given the sheer impossibility of the Dogon's knowledge, it was only a matter of time before a much more radical and sensational explanation emerged, one that would capture the global imagination and thrust this tribal mystery into the heart of popular culture. This explosive interpretation arrived in the late 1960s, primarily through the work of Swiss author Erich von Däniken. In his blockbuster book, Chariots of the Gods, published in 1968, von Däniken presented a sweeping, controversial thesis that many ancient wonders and enigmatic artifacts from humanity's past were not the products of human ingenuity alone, but were evidence of direct contact with extraterrestrial visitors. For von Däniken and the burgeoning ancient astronaut theory movement, the Dogon people and their knowledge of Sirius B were not just a curious puzzle. They were the ultimate smoking gun, the clearest possible proof that aliens had visited Earth in the distant past. Ancient astronaut theorists, or proponents of what is often called paleocontact theory, argued that the Dogon mystery could only be resolved by taking their creation myth literally. The Nommo were not mythological symbols or spiritual concepts. They were actual, physical astronauts from an advanced civilization orbiting the star Sirius. Their fish-like appearance was interpreted not as a symbolic detail, but as a literal description of their biology, perhaps indicating a species adapted to a watery world or even the bulky, sealed environment of a spacesuit and helmet. Their descent in a spinning, roaring arc was reimagined as the landing of a rocket ship or a futuristic vessel, with the accompanying whirlwind and fire representing the exhaust and thrust of its engines. The knowledge they imparted, the precise details of the Sirius system, wasn't myth. It was a technical briefing, a transfer of advanced astronomical data from a spacefaring culture to a primitive one. This interpretation presented a seemingly elegant and thrilling solution to an otherwise baffling problem. It explained the how and the why in one fell swoop. How did the Dogon know? Because aliens told them. Why did the aliens tell them? To jumpstart their civilization, or perhaps to leave a record of their visit. Von Däniken and others pointed to the Dogon as a pristine, isolated case study. Here was a culture that had been largely cut off from the cross-pollination of ideas and the gradual advance of technology. Their knowledge, therefore, couldn't be explained away as something they borrowed or accidentally discovered. It had to be a preserved artifact, a direct download from a more advanced source, untouched by time and outside influence. This narrative was powerful, romantic, and perfectly tailored for a world newly enchanted by the Apollo missions and the possibilities of the space age. It transformed the Dogon from an anthropological subject into the centerpiece of a cosmic whodunit, suggesting that the true history of humanity was written not just on Earth but in the stars. While the ancient astronaut theory captured public attention, it was a meticulously researched book that truly launched the Dogon enigma into mainstream global consciousness. In 1976, author Robert Temple published The Sirius Mystery, a work that would become an international bestseller and forever cement the Dogon people as central figures in the debate about humanity's ancient past. Temple, an American researcher with a background in Oriental studies, took the foundational work of Gryayul and Dietylin and constructed a far more expansive and controversial argument. His book was not merely a retelling of the anthropological findings. It was a bold, sweeping thesis that attempted to trace the Dogon's impossible knowledge back through millennia to the very cradle of Western civilization. Temple's core argument was both simple and revolutionary. He proposed that the Dogon knowledge was not an isolated phenomenon, but rather the surviving remnant of a sophisticated astronomical tradition that was once widespread in the ancient world. He believed this tradition originated not with extraterrestrials, but with an advanced, seafaring African civilization that had somehow mastered the secrets of the Sirius system through means now lost to history. According to Temple, this knowledge was then carried north across the Mediterranean and was inherited by the great civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia. He saw the Dogon not as the originators of this wisdom, but as its faithful guardians, a remote tribe that had preserved a sacred, ancient truth long after it had been forgotten by the rest of the world. To support this grand narrative, Temple embarked on an ambitious comparative mythology project. He scoured the texts and art of ancient Sumer and Egypt, searching for parallels to the Dogon cosmology. He pointed to the amphibious god Ons from Babylonian myth, who was said to have emerged from the Persian Gulf to teach humanity the arts of civilization. He drew connections between the Dogon's fish like Nommo and the Egyptian goddess Isis, who was also strongly associated with the star Sirius, which the Egyptians called Sopdet. He even interpreted certain Egyptian hieroglyphs and Sumerian cylinder seals as symbolic representations of a binary star system, suggesting that the knowledge of Sirius B was encoded in their sacred iconography all along. The Sirius mystery was a phenomenon because it presented its arguments with a compelling, scholarly tone, complete with footnotes and references. It gave a veneer of academic rigor to a fantastical idea, making it accessible and seemingly credible to a mass audience hungry for mysteries. Temple's work effectively created a new genre of popular history, one that connected disparate dots across cultures and epochs to suggest a hidden thread of esoteric knowledge running through human history. For many readers, it was a thrilling alternative to the standard, linear narrative of scientific progress, suggesting that ancient peoples might have possessed insights that rivaled or even surpassed our own. The book ensured that the question of the Dogon would no longer be confined to anthropological journals. It was now a puzzle for the entire world to ponder, a cornerstone of every conversation about ancient mysteries and the possibility of lost high cultures. Of course, such a radical and paradigm-shattering claim was never going to be accepted without a fierce and rigorous challenge from the mainstream academic community. As the theories of von Däniken and Temple captured the public's imagination throughout the 1970s, a powerful counter-narrative began to emerge from anthropologists and astronomers, one that sought to dismantle the so-called mystery piece by piece, arguing that the true enigma was not in the stars, but in the methods and interpretations of those who first brought the story to light. This skeptical response did not dismiss the Dogon's rich cosmology. Instead, it questioned whether Western interpreters had accurately understood it, and more importantly, whether the entire premise of their impossible knowledge was built on a series of critical misunderstandings. The first and most significant line of critique was aimed directly at the work of Marcel Grioul and Germain Dieterlen themselves. Other anthropologists who had worked in the region began to point out that the mid-20th century was not the era of perfect isolation that the mystery narrative often implied. By the 1930s and 40s, the Dogon region had been a French colony for decades. Missionary schools had been established, and perhaps most critically, French troops were garrisoned in the area during the Second World War. This meant that the Dogon people had been exposed to Western visitors, ideas, and conversation for a generation before Grioul's pivotal sessions with Ogot Merli. Skeptics proposed a theory of cultural contamination, the idea that this astronomical knowledge hadn't come from the stars or from ancient priests, but had been inadvertently imported from these Western visitors and then absorbed into the local mythology. This theory gained considerable traction when researchers like Walter van Beek and others conducted their own fieldwork with the Dogon in the late 1970s and 80s. Van Beek reported that while he found a deeply spiritual and complex culture, he was unable to find any elders or priests who could independently verify the specific, precise astronomical details that Grioul had recorded. They spoke passionately of the Nommo and of Sirius, but their descriptions were far more mythological and symbolic than technical. This led skeptics to a startling possibility that the information provided to Grioul was not a timeless secret but a unique synthesis. Perhaps a few knowledgeable elders, in conversation with a deeply curious and respected French anthropologist who himself was knowledgeable about astronomy, had woven together their traditional myths with fragments of Western scientific knowledge they had picked up from soldiers or teachers. In this view, the Dogon weren't revealing an ancient secret. They were engaging in a dynamic cultural exchange, reflecting back to Grioul a fascinating blend of their own beliefs and the new ideas they had encountered from the outside world. Astronomers then entered the fray, attacking the mystery from a different angle. They argued that even if the information was pre-contact and genuine, the standard interpretation was fundamentally flawed. The main target was the 50-year orbital period. While it is a close match to the 50.1-year cycle of Sirius B, astronomers like Carl Sagan pointed out that this number is not unique to astronomy. A 50 or 60-year cycle is a very common timescale in human culture, often used to mark the length of a human generation or a grand ceremonial cycle. The Chinese, Babylonian, and Hindu calendars all feature prominent 60-year cycles. The coincidence, they argued, could be just that, a coincidence. Furthermore, they noted that the orbit itself is not a perfect 50 years, and that a truly advanced culture would have specified the far more precise figure, not a rounded number. The most devastating astronomical critique, however, focused on the very foundation of the mystery, the idea that Sirius B is impossible to see. While it's true that seeing it with the naked eye is impossible, some astronomers began to question whether it was always so faint. White dwarfs are stellar embers. They cool and grow dimmer over immense stretches of time. What if several thousand years ago Sirius B was significantly hotter and brighter? If it had been a magnitude or two brighter in the past, it might have been just barely visible to a highly skilled observer under perfect conditions. This is, of course, highly speculative and unproven, but it introduces a sliver of scientific doubt into the central pillar of the argument. It proposes a far more mundane, though still incredibly impressive, possibility that an ancient astronomer with exceptional eyesight and decades of meticulous observation might have actually glimpsed the tiny companion and tracked its motion, embedding this phenomenal feat of observation into their culture's lore, which then survived long after the star faded beyond the reach of human vision. This theory doesn't require aliens or lost civilizations. It requires only a single, forgotten genius under a dark, ancient sky. This possibility of cultural contamination presents perhaps the most grounded and widely accepted explanation within the academic community, though it is no less controversial in its implications. To understand how this could have happened, we need to step away from the cliffs of Mali and look at the broader historical context of European contact in West Africa. By the time Marcel Grioul first arrived in the 1930s, the Dogon homeland had not been an isolated paradise for decades. It had been part of French Sudan, a colonial possession since the late 19th century. This meant the presence of colonial administrators, military outposts, and perhaps most significantly, Christian missionary schools. These schools, established to educate and convert local populations, were hubs of Western knowledge, and it is entirely plausible that basic astronomy, including the fascinating discovery of Sirius's faint companion star, could have been part of the curriculum or dinner-time conversation. Imagine a French teacher or a soldier gazing up at the brilliant African night sky, pointing out Sirius to a curious Dogon elder. In an attempt to share the wonder of modern science, they might have explained that our brightest star is not alone, that it has a tiny, incredibly dense partner that orbits it every 50 years, a fact that was, by then, established scientific knowledge in the West. For the Dogon, a people whose entire cosmology was already deeply intertwined with Sirius, this new information would not have been a random fact, it would have been seismic. It would have been received not as secular science, but as a profound validation or even a revelation about their own spiritual beliefs. Their existing mythology, which already spoke of a companion or an origin in that star system, provided a perfect vessel for this new data. Over a generation, this imported knowledge could have been seamlessly woven into the existing tapestry of their oral traditions, sanctified through ritual, and then presented to later anthropologists like Grioul not as recent news but as ancient, sacred truth. This process, known as acculturation, is not a theory of deception. It's a well-documented phenomenon of how cultures interact and absorb outside ideas. The human mind is a brilliant synthesizer, especially when new information resonates powerfully with pre-existing beliefs. The Dogon would have had no reason to distinguish between a fact learned from a missionary and a truth passed down from their ancestors. Both would simply become part of their understood reality. This reinterpretation challenges the very heart of the mystery. It suggests that the stunning accuracy of their astronomical knowledge is not a puzzle from the ancient world, but a reflection of a more recent cross-cultural exchange. The priests who spoke to Grioul may have been entirely sincere, believing they were sharing timeless secrets, unaware that the most precise details might have entered their tradition only a generation or two earlier, transforming the Dogon enigma from a story about ancient aliens into a fascinating case study in how knowledge is transmitted, adapted, and sanctified. But perhaps the most profound challenge to the entire mystery lies not in the stars or in potential contamination, but in the very nature of interpretation itself. We must ask a difficult and humbling question. Did Western researchers, armed with their own scientific worldview, fundamentally misinterpret the rich, symbolic language of the Dogon, mistakenly reading literal astronomy into what was always intended as metaphorical truth? This is not a question of dishonesty, but one of cultural translation, the immense difficulty of moving a concept from one framework of understanding into another without losing its essential meaning. Consider the core of the issue, the 50-year cycle. In our modern scientific mindset, a 50-year celestial orbit is a precise, measurable physical fact. When we hear the Dogon speak of a 50-year cycle for their most important ceremony, our brains immediately make a literal connection to the 50.1-year orbit of Sirius B. It seems like an undeniable match, but what if within Dogon cosmology, the number 50 holds a completely different significance? What if it is not a unit of time in our sense, but a symbolic representation of completeness, of a full life, or of a spiritual cycle of renewal? Many cultures around the world operate on cyclical rather than linear conceptions of time. The ancient Mayan calendar, the Chinese 60-year cycle, the Hindu Yuga system, all use long cycles to mark eras of spiritual, not just astronomical, significance. The Sigui ceremony itself provides a powerful clue. While it is often reported as being held every 60 years, the timing is not a rigid, calendrical event set by watching the stars. Anthropologists like Walter Van Beek noted that the ceremony is scheduled based on a complex combination of factors: the death of the previous ceremony's participants, the availability of resources, and communal readiness. It is a generational event meant to mark the passage of leadership and the renewal of the world itself. The number 60 or 50 in this context is far more likely to be a symbolic marker of a generation's length rather than a precise astronomical timer. The coincidence with the orbit of Sirius B could be exactly that, a remarkable but ultimately random coincidence that, once noticed by an outside observer, was latched onto as the central key to the mystery, forcing all other interpretations to bend to fit this one compelling idea. This leads us to the very symbols at the heart of the story. The Dogon describe Po Tolo as a seed. In a scientific interpretation, we see this as a perfect analogy for a white dwarf, small and dense. But in an agricultural society, a seed is so much more. It is a symbol of potential, of life, of the essence from which something vast and nourishing grows. Calling the companion star a seed might have less to do with its physical properties and everything to do with its spiritual role as the source of creation, the point from which the Nommo emerged. Similarly, the metal sagala, described as impossibly heavy, might not be a description of degenerate matter, but a mythological concept representing spiritual weight, significance, and immutability. When we take these rich, multifaceted symbols and reduce them to mere scientific data points, we may be committing a grave error of interpretation, effectively silencing the Dogon's own voice and philosophy and replacing it with our own. The real mystery, then, might not be how the Dogon knew about Sirius B, but why we are so determined to make their beautiful, complex spirituality conform to our own narrow standards of scientific fact. This raises a fascinating and broader question. If the Dogon truly did possess this knowledge independently, were they truly alone? Could other great ancient civilizations have also somehow perceived the dual nature of Sirius, embedding this secret into their monuments and myths? The search for an answer leads us down a path lined with tantalizing clues and heated controversy, primarily centered on the ancient civilization most famously obsessed with the stars, the Egyptians. The connection begins with the star itself. The Egyptians revered Sirius, which they called Soptit, or in Greek, Sothis, its annual heliacal rising, its first appearance just before dawn after a period of invisibility, coincided with the life-giving flooding of the Nile River. This event was so critical that it marked their new year and was the cornerstone of their entire agricultural calendar. The goddess Isis was intimately linked with Sirius, and Osiris, her husband and the god of the afterlife, was often associated with the constellation Orion, which sits near Sirius in the night sky. This celestial relationship mirrored their divine mythology on Earth, given their profound astronomical sophistication, evidenced in the precise alignment of pyramids and temples. The idea that they might have known more about their most important star is a compelling one. Proponents of this theory point to the temple of the goddess Isis at Dendera. Within that temple lies a fascinating artifact known as the Zodiac of Dendera, a massive stone bas-relief map of the heavens. While the carving itself is from the Greco-Roman period, it is believed to be based on far more ancient knowledge. Some researchers claim that the depiction of Sirius on this zodiac is not of a single star, but is shown with a distinct companion, a smaller figure sitting beside it. To the modern eye, trained by the Sirius mystery, this looks like a symbolic representation of the binary system. Furthermore, certain esoteric interpretations of Egyptian mythology suggest that the companion star had a role in their cosmology. Isis searching for the dismembered parts of Osiris is sometimes reinterpreted as a metaphor for a search for this lost, heavy companion star, the body of the god in the heavens. Beyond Egypt, the trail leads to ancient Greece. The philosopher and poet Hesiod, writing around the 8th century BC, spoke of a 50-year cycle in his work, Works and Days, which governed the lifespan of a man and was tied to grand celestial events. While this is a common cultural timespan, the coincidence with the Sirius orbital period is noted by those searching for patterns. More directly, the Greek astronomer Hipparchus is sometimes brought into the debate. While there is no direct evidence he knew of Sirius B, his work cataloging stars and noting their movements was so precise that some wonder if he, or another lost astronomer, detected the same gravitational wobble in Sirius that would later clue in 19th century scientists. However, the mainstream archaeological and academic view remains deeply skeptical of these interpretations. Egyptologists argue that the imagery in the Dendera zodiac is being read with modern eyes. The companion to Sirius in the carving is far more likely to represent a different deity, a lesser star in the constellation, or a purely symbolic element relating to the goddess's power, not a physical astronomical body. They point out that in the entire vast corpus of Egyptian hieroglyphic texts and astronomical writings, there is not a single, clear, and unambiguous reference to a second star in the Sirius system. For a civilization that recorded everything from tax receipts to prayers, the absence of such a monumental discovery in their records is deafening. The Greek references are seen as even more tenuous. A 50-year cycle appears in many cultures simply because it roughly equates to a human lifetime or 2 generations, a natural span for marking significant renewal. There is no text from Hipparchus or any other Greek thinker that mentions a faint companion to the dog star. The wobble of Sirius is so slight that detecting it without precise, long-term telescopic measurements is considered impossible. These claims, skeptics argue, are classic examples of pattern seeking, taking disparate, ambiguous pieces of information from the past and assembling them into a narrative that fits a modern theory, while ignoring the vast silence and lack of direct evidence from the ancient sources themselves. The debate, therefore, remains at a stalemate, caught between the compelling human desire to find lost wisdom and the rigorous demands of historical proof. Perhaps the most famous and influential scientific voice to weigh in on this enigma belonged to the renowned astronomer and science communicator Carl Sagan. In his 1979 book, Broca's Brain, Sagan dedicated an entire chapter to the Dogon mystery, not to simply dismiss it, but to offer a compelling and psychologically nuanced alternative explanation. A master of making complex ideas accessible, Sagan approached the puzzle not with ridicule, but with a deep respect for both the Dogon culture and the scientific method. His hypothesis didn't require ancient astronauts or lost civilizations. Instead, it focused on a powerful and well-documented phenomenon of human psychology, the incredible speed and depth of cultural assimilation. Sagan began by openly acknowledging the facts. The Dogon did possess surprising knowledge about Sirius B. The critical question for him was one of timing. He meticulously highlighted the historical context that often gets glossed over in more sensational accounts. By the time Marcel Grioul arrived in the 1930s, the Dogon had been in contact with the Western world for decades. French schools, military garrisons, and missionaries were an established presence in the region. Sagan pointed out that the discovery of Sirius B was a major astronomical story in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It was exactly the kind of wondrous scientific fact that a Western teacher, soldier, or missionary, gazing up at the spectacular African night sky, would be eager to share with curious locals. Imagine the scene, a European pointing to the brilliant star Sirius and explaining, "You see that star? We have learned it has a tiny, invisible companion, heavier than anything you can imagine, that circles it every 50 years. Now, here is the crucial part of Sagan's argument. For the Dogon, this wasn't just a random piece of trivia. Sirius was already the most important celestial body in their spiritual universe. To hear a powerful outsider confirm that their most sacred star had a hidden companion would have been earth-shattering. It wouldn't have been heard as secular science. It would have been received as a profound validation of their deepest beliefs. Their existing mythology, which already spoke of companions and origins in that star system, provided a perfect vessel for this new, astonishing information. In a process that anthropologists call acculturation, this external knowledge would have been immediately and seamlessly woven into the existing fabric of their oral traditions. Over just 1 or 2 generations, through retellings by priests and elders, the story would have been sanctified. Its modern origin would have faded away, leaving only the core truth feeling ancient and divine. Sagan supported this by pointing to a well-known psychological effect. When we hear a fascinating piece of information, we often remember the fact itself but quickly forget the source. How many of us know a fun fact but couldn't recall where or when we first learned it? Now, magnify that effect across an entire culture with a strong oral tradition. The who and when of the information's arrival is lost, but the what becomes embedded as canonical lore. The Dogon priests who spoke to Grail were almost certainly acting in complete sincerity, sharing what they genuinely believed to be ancient, sacred knowledge passed down through the ages. They were not being deceptive, they were the products of a rapid and profound cultural synthesis. Sagan's genius was in recognizing that a mystery doesn't always need an exotic solution. Sometimes the most incredible thing is not alien contact, but the astonishing ability of human cultures to absorb, adapt, and transform ideas, making them their own in the blink of a historical eye. While outsiders debate the origins of their knowledge, the Dogon people themselves hold a perspective that is often overlooked in the heated exchange between ancient astronaut theorists and academic skeptics. For the Dogon, this is not a mystery to be solved, but a living truth to be honored, a core part of their spiritual identity that transcends Western categories of science and mythology. Their response to the controversy is not one of academic rebuttal, but of quiet, steadfast insistence on the authenticity of their ancestral traditions, which they view as a complete and coherent system of understanding the world, not a puzzle missing pieces for outsiders to fit together. When anthropologists like Walter van Beek returned to the region to re-examine the claims, they found that while many elders could not replicate the specific astronomical details recorded by Grail, their connection to Sirius remained profound and unwavering. They spoke of the star with deep reverence, not as a distant ball of gas to be analyzed, but as a spiritual home, the source of the life-giving Nommo and the foundation of their moral and social order. The debates about telescopes and colonial contamination are, from their viewpoint, largely irrelevant. The truth of their beliefs is confirmed not by matching scientific data points, but by the enduring power of their rituals, the guidance these stories provide for living a good life, and the unbroken chain of transmission from their ancestors. Their knowledge is validated by its function within their society, not by its correspondence to external facts. There is also a palpable sense of frustration among some Dogon intellectuals and community leaders with how their culture has been portrayed. They see their rich, complex cosmology flattened into a single talking point about Sirius B, reducing a vast spiritual philosophy to a celestial trivia question. The focus on the astronomical mystery often completely ignores the deeper meanings of their symbols. The phonio seed as a representation of the potential for life, the heavy metal sagala as a metaphor for the weight of wisdom and tradition, and the 50-year cycle as a marker of generational renewal. They feel that Western interpreters, in their zeal to prove or disprove an extraordinary claim, have consistently missed the forest for the trees, dissecting their beliefs for evidence while failing to understand their spiritual essence. Furthermore, the sensational narrative has at times created a complicated relationship with tourism and outside interest. While some communities have benefited economically from the notoriety, others express concern about the commodification of their most sacred ceremonies. The Sigui, a profoundly spiritual event meant for communal renewal and connection with the ancestors, has sometimes been depicted as a public spectacle or an archaic performance put on for curious outsiders. This tension highlights a central conflict: the Dogon's desire to share the beauty of their culture with respect versus the world's desire to mine it for proofs and secrets. Their response is not to shut the door entirely, but to assert control over the narrative, emphasizing that their knowledge is not an artifact to be owned and explained by others, but a living tradition that they alone are the rightful guardians and interpreters of. Ultimately, the Dogon response challenges the very framework of the debate. They invite us to consider that there are ways of knowing that exist outside the scientific method, that truth can be carried in story and ritual just as accurately as in a textbook, and that the value of a belief system lies in its ability to give meaning and order to human life. Their insistence on the authenticity of their knowledge is not a claim about historical fact, but a declaration of cultural sovereignty. They are saying, in effect, that this is our story, our truth, and it requires no validation from telescopes or academics to be real. It is a perspective that asks us to listen rather than interrogate, to understand rather than explain away, reminding us that some of the most profound human mysteries are not problems to be solved, but wisdom to be received. This leads us to a crucial and often overlooked question in the modern era. As our own astronomical tools have grown infinitely more powerful, have they actually verified or contradicted the details preserved in Dogon tradition? The journey to answer this takes us from the great telescopes of the 20th century to the cutting-edge orbital observatories of today, and the results are a fascinating mix of confirmation, mystery, and ongoing debate. One of the most significant validations came with the refinement of Sirius B's orbital period. Early 20th century estimates had placed it at around 49 years, but as tracking methods improved, the figure was firmly established at 50.05 years. The fact that the Dogon cycle of 50 years sits so remarkably close to this precise scientific measurement remains one of the most compelling pieces of the puzzle, a numerical alignment that is difficult to dismiss as mere chance. Yet, the most explosive development in the modern astronomical chapter of this story revolves around a third point of light, the long-theorized Sirius C. For decades, some astrophysicists have speculated that the gravitational dynamics within the Sirius system might hint at the presence of another, much smaller body orbiting the primary pair. Intriguingly, this scientific hypothesis finds a powerful echo in the Dogon tradition itself. Beyond their detailed knowledge of Po-Tolo, the Dogon also speak of a third star in the system, which they call Emya, or the Sun of Women. They describe it as being larger than Sirius B but 4 times lighter in weight, and say it occupies its own separate orbit. If a red dwarf or a large planet were to be discovered in the system, it would astonishingly align with this description. The search for this elusive third body has been a roller coaster of claimed discoveries and subsequent debunking. In the 1990s, 2 French astronomers, Daniel Benest and J. L. Duvent, published a study analyzing a century and a half of positional data on Sirius A and B. They concluded that the subtle gravitational wobbles they detected were best explained by the presence of a small, third object, possibly a brown dwarf with a mass roughly 50 times that of Jupiter, orbiting Sirius A with a period of about 6 years. This sent a shockwave through the community of mystery enthusiasts who saw it as stunning potential corroboration of the Dogon lore. However, subsequent observations, particularly with the Hubble Space Telescope's fine guidance sensors, which are exquisitely capable of measuring precise stellar positions, failed to confirm these findings. The alleged gravitational perturbations attributed to Sirius C could not be consistently verified, and the scientific consensus today leans heavily towards the Sirius system being a binary pair, with no conclusive evidence for a third stellar companion. This leaves us in a complex and unresolved position. On one hand, modern astronomy has spectacularly confirmed the core Dogon claims about Sirius B, its existence, its density, and its orbital period. These are not trivial facts, they are the central pillars of the mystery. On the other hand, the potential for a Sirius C remains an open question, a tantalizing maybe that keeps the door to wonder slightly ajar. For every astronomer who dismisses the idea, another points to the incredible challenges of detecting a faint, low-mass object so close to the blinding glare of the brightest star in our sky. It is a needle in a cosmic haystack, and our technology, while advanced, may not yet be powerful enough to definitively rule it out. This ongoing uncertainty means the Dogon descriptions of Enya exist in a state of limbo not yet proven by science, but also not entirely disproven, preserving a sliver of their prophetic credibility and ensuring that the final word on the Sirius system has not yet been written. Yet, despite the compelling logic of contamination theories and the weight of academic skepticism, the story of the Dogon people refuses to fade into a neat, solved case. It continues to ignite the imaginations of researchers, historians, and millions of enthusiasts around the world, persisting as a captivating enigma for one simple reason. Certain aspects of their knowledge feel almost too precise, too perfectly articulated, to be comfortably explained away as borrowed trivia or a simple misunderstanding. The human mind is wired to recognize patterns, and the pattern presented by the Dogon lore aligns with our scientific data in a way that feels profoundly intentional, creating a cognitive itch that demands to be scratched. Consider the sheer specificity of their descriptions. They didn't just know there was a companion star, they characterized it with a series of startlingly accurate adjectives. They called it the smallest thing, which for a white dwarf is true in terms of physical diameter. They called it the heaviest thing, a direct correlate for its immense density. They described it as made of a metal heavier than iron, a poetic but scientifically sound description of its exotic, degenerate matter. Most critically, they didn't just say it orbited, they specified an elliptical orbit. A coincidence could perhaps account for one of these details, but the accumulation of multiple, independently accurate descriptors begins to feel like a statistical anomaly. It reads less like a culture retelling a fun fact they overheard, and more like a culture preserving a technical schematic. This precision becomes even more striking when we contrast it with how other, verified instances of cultural contamination typically manifest. When outside ideas are absorbed into a mythology, they often become mythologized themselves, blurred and reshaped to fit the existing symbolic framework. For example, if a missionary had spoken of a tiny, heavy star, we might expect the Dogon to incorporate that into their existing lore as a metaphorical, heavy stone of the gods or a dense seed of wisdom. But what we have is a description that remains, in its essence, coldly astronomical. The preservation of the orbital period as 50 years, a number so close to the scientific reality, is particularly difficult to dismiss. It lacks the symbolic rounding we see in so many other cultural cycles. It feels like a data point. This retention of specific, quantitative information, seemingly unadulterated by the usual process of mythological elaboration, is what continues to give many researchers pause. Furthermore, the very mechanism of contamination is not as clean-cut as it might first appear. The theory relies on the assumption that a Western visitor in the 1920s or 30s would have shared not only the existence of Sirius B, but this entire suite of detailed properties. Yet how many soldiers or missionaries stationed in remote Mali would have been conversant in the orbital mechanics and astrophysical composition of white dwarf stars? While the existence and 50-year orbit were established facts, the incredibly dense nature of white dwarfs was cutting-edge astrophysics in the 1920s, a complex concept being debated by the likes of Eddington and Chandrasekhar. It seems less probable that this nuanced, advanced detail would be part of casual conversation under the stars, making its apparent presence in Dogon lore all the more puzzling. This enduring mystery taps into something far deeper than a simple historical puzzle. It speaks to a fundamental human desire for wonder. The possibility, however slim, that an ancient culture could have accessed a profound truth about the universe through means we do not yet understand is a powerful and romantic notion. It challenges the linear, progressive narrative of human history that says we alone, with our powerful technology, are the first to uncover the cosmos's secrets. It suggests that the past might hold untapped wells of wisdom, and that other ways of knowing, whether through spiritual revelation, lost technology, or contact with other intelligences, might exist alongside our scientific method. The Dogon story, therefore, endures not merely as an academic dispute, but as a modern myth in the making, a compelling story that allows us to look up at the star Sirius and feel a shiver of connection to an ancient people, and the thrilling, unresolved possibility that we are not alone in the universe and that our history is far stranger than our textbooks dare to admit. So if the Dogon tradition is truly an isolated phenomenon, a single, inexplicable spark of advanced knowledge in the West African night, it stands as a profound anomaly. But what if it isn't alone? What if we look beyond Mali and find that other ancient cultures, separated by vast oceans and millennia, also encoded surprisingly sophisticated astronomical ideas into their myths, particularly about Sirius? The search for answers inevitably leads us into the fascinating world of comparative mythology, where we look for patterns and parallels that might suggest either a shared human consciousness or the faint, fragmented traces of a much older, lost understanding of the cosmos. Our first and most compelling stop is ancient Egypt, a civilization whose entire existence was synchronized with the heavens. The Egyptians didn't just observe Sirius, which they called Sopdet, they revered it. Its heliacal rising, its first appearance on the horizon just before dawn after a period of invisibility, perfectly predicted the annual, life-giving flooding of the Nile River. This event was so critical it marked their new year, the beginning of the season of Akhet, or inundation. The goddess Isis became intimately linked with Sirius, while her husband, Osiris, the god of the afterlife and rebirth, was associated with the constellation Orion, which sits near Sirius in the sky. This celestial marriage mirrored their earthly mythology, creating a cosmic drama that played out overhead each year. For a culture that aligned pyramids with such precision and whose temple ceilings are maps of the heavens, the question arises, did their deep, cyclical connection to Sirius lead them to intuit more about its true nature? Some researchers point to the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, where the famous zodiac ceiling depicts Sirius with a distinct, smaller companion figure. While mainstream Egyptology interprets this as a different deity or a symbolic element to those searching for clues, it looks tantalizingly like a representation of a binary system, a secret hidden in plain sight within their sacred art. Journeying further back in time, we encounter the ancient Sumerians of Mesopotamia, another culture with an astonishingly advanced astronomical tradition. Their pantheon included a figure named Ons, described by the Babylonian priest Berossus. According to these ancient accounts, Ons was an amphibious being, a creature with the head of a man and the body of a fish, who emerged from the Erythraean Sea, likely the Persian Gulf, to teach humanity the foundations of civilization, writing, law, architecture, and agriculture. The parallels to the Dogon's fish like Nommo teachers are immediately striking. Both are aquatic, civilizing figures who arrive from another realm to impart wisdom. Furthermore, the Sumerians held the star Sirius in high esteem, associating it with their goddess Inanna, who, like the Egyptian Isis, was a complex deity of love, war, and fertility. The symbolic connection between a fish-like god and a star so important to agricultural cycles creates a thematic bridge across continents, suggesting a potential archetype, a shared mythological software that different cultures use to process the profound idea of knowledge coming from the water and the stars. Crossing the Atlantic, we find that the indigenous cultures of the Americas also possessed intricate cosmologies that challenge our assumptions. While a direct link to Sirius is less clear, the thematic parallels in how knowledge is conveyed are profound. The Hopi people of the American Southwest speak of the Kachinas, ancestral spirit beings who come from the skies and descend upon their mesas to teach sacred rituals, laws, and agricultural techniques before returning to their celestial home. The Maya, with their incredibly precise calendar systems and understanding of celestial cycles, tracked Venus with an accuracy that rivals modern computations. These independent developments of complex astronomical knowledge demonstrate that ancient peoples were far more than primitive stargazers. They were meticulous observers who built entire worldviews around the movements of the heavens. This global pattern of advanced sky watching makes the Dogon knowledge seem slightly less anomalous, placing it within a broader context of human achievement, even if its specific accuracy regarding Sirius B remains uniquely precise. So what are we to make of these echoes across time and space? Scholars are deeply divided, generally falling into two camps. The first, the diffusionist theory, suggests that these parallels are not coincidences but evidence of cultural contact. Perhaps, as Robert Temple proposed, the knowledge originated with one advanced seafaring culture, possibly in Africa, and was carried along trade routes, slowly spreading and being adapted by the Egyptians, the Sumerians, and perhaps even others, with the Dogon acting as a remote repository that preserved the original information longest. The second, more widely accepted academic view is the theory of independent invention or psychic unity. This posits that humanity, faced with the same awe-inspiring night sky, naturally developed similar myths and symbols to explain it. The teacher from the water archetype could be a universal symbol for the origin of life and wisdom, emerging independently in cultures that relied on rivers and seas. The prominence of Sirius as the brightest star would naturally attract myth and ritual in any culture that paid attention to the cosmos. This search for connections is a delicate dance. It is all too easy to fall into the trap of patternism, selectively picking similar symbols from different cultures and weaving them into a predetermined narrative while ignoring the vast differences in context and meaning. For every compelling parallel, there are 1,000 divergences. The Egyptian Sopdet is not the Sumerian Inanna, and neither is the Dogon Nommo. Their stories, functions, and meanings within their respective cultures are unique. The true value of comparative mythology may not be in proving a single, unified ancient truth, but in appreciating the incredible diversity of the human imagination. It shows us that our ancestors everywhere were looking up, seeking meaning, and constructing stories that connected them to the universe in the most profound ways, whether they were building pyramids in the desert, ziggurats between two rivers, or living on a remote escarpment in Mali, guarding a secret about a tiny, heavy star. This incredible preservation of knowledge brings us to one of the most critical questions at the heart of the entire mystery. How could such complex, technical information survive for centuries or even millennia without being distorted beyond recognition? The answer lies in understanding the profound power and meticulous structure of Dogon oral tradition, a sophisticated system far more robust than the simple act of storytelling. For the Dogon, this isn't just talking, it's a sacred, multi-generational project of cultural memory, engineered for near-perfect accuracy. Unlike many cultures that rely on the written word, the Dogon developed an intricate framework for preserving their most vital knowledge. This isn't a free-form narrative open to creative interpretation. Instead, it functions more like a living library with a strict set of rules. The responsibility for safeguarding this astronomical wisdom doesn't fall to everyone. It is the exclusive domain of a select group of initiated elders and spiritual leaders, most notably the Dogon, the high priest of each village. These individuals undergo decades of rigorous training, essentially memorizing a vast and complex body of cosmological information through a process of direct verbal transmission from master to apprentice. The knowledge is not shared casually. It is revealed in stages with deeper levels of understanding granted only after the initiate has proven their ability to accurately recall and protect the information they have already received. This creates a closed, verified loop of custodianship where error is systematically weeded out. The information itself is not stored as a dry list of astronomical facts. That's where its true genius lies. The data is masterfully encoded into the very fabric of their culture, woven into multiple layers to ensure its survival. It is embedded within the lyrics of ancient songs sung during the Sigui and other ceremonies. It is physically mapped onto the sand during rituals, using stones and drawings to represent the stars and their movements. It is carved into the symbols adorning their masks and woven into the patterns of their textiles. Most importantly, it is inextricably linked to their most sacred creation myths, the story of Amma and the Nommo. By making this knowledge a fundamental pillar of their religious and cultural identity, its accurate preservation becomes a matter of spiritual necessity, not just historical curiosity. To forget or alter a detail about the orbit of Potolo is not merely a factual error. It is a religious transgression, a breaking of the covenant with their ancestors and their gods. This deep spiritual stakes provide a powerful incentive for flawless transmission. When we look globally, we find that the Dogon are not entirely unique in this feat of oral precision. Other cultures have demonstrated a remarkable capacity to preserve complex information across vast stretches of time without writing. The most famous example comes from the indigenous Australians, whose oral traditions, known as dreaming stories, have been scientifically shown to accurately describe geographical features and coastal lines that existed over 7,000 years ago, from a time when sea levels were significantly lower. These stories, passed down through countless generations, contained precise enough details to guide modern archaeologists to submerged landscapes, proving an oral tradition can function as a reliable historical record. Similarly, the ancient Greeks relied on oral poets, known as rhapsodes, who could recite the entirety of the Iliad and the Odyssey epic poems totaling over 27,000 lines, with stunning accuracy using mnemonic devices and a structured metrical form. What sets the Dogon apart, however, is not just the longevity of the information, but its specific technical nature. Remembering the plot of a heroic epic or the location of a sacred mountain is one thing. Preserving the orbital period, elliptical path, and dense composition of an invisible star is an entirely different level of complexity. This requires a system that prioritizes numerical and mechanical precision over narrative flow. The Dogon achieved this by anchoring this data to their grandest and most infrequent ceremony, the Sigui. By tying the reset of this cosmic clock to an event that only occurs once every 60 years, they created a powerful mnemonic trigger. The entire community participates in a ritual that reinforces this specific 50 to 60-year cycle, making the number itself a sacred, lived experience rather than an abstract figure. This combination of exclusive custodianship, multi-layered encoding, spiritual imperative, and generational ceremony created a cultural vault so secure that it could potentially protect a secret of the stars for 1,000 years, challenging our very understanding of what is possible through the spoken word alone. Yet amid all the theories of outside influence, we must confront a humbling and deeply intriguing possibility that the Dogon people, through sheer genius and a uniquely developed form of science, might have discovered the secrets of Sirius entirely on their own. This explanation asks us to set aside ideas of contamination and alien contact to consider the incredible power of the human mind, honed by generations of meticulous observation under a pristine night sky. What if their knowledge wasn't a gift from others, but a hard-won prize from centuries of indigenous scientific inquiry, using methods so subtle and sophisticated that we in the modern West have simply failed to recognize them? To even entertain this idea, we must first dismantle our own technological arrogance. We assume that because they lacked brass telescopes and photographic plates, they were blind to the finer workings of the cosmos. But this ignores the profound potential of the naked eye, trained over a lifetime and guided by an oral tradition that prioritizes celestial observation above almost all else. The Dogon priests were not casual stargazers. They were the equivalent of tenured professors in a university of the sky, devoting their entire lives to watching, recording, and interpreting the heavens. Their methodology would have been holistic, combining precise visual tracking with a deep understanding of mathematics, mythology, and even the landscape itself. They might have used the sharp, fixed points of the Bandiagara escarpment, a specific rock pinnacle or a notch in the cliff face, as a giant natural observatory, aligning the rising and setting of stars with these terrestrial markers over cycles that span decades. This long-term positional astronomy could have allowed them to detect the slightest anomalies in the movement of Sirius itself. The key could lie in that very anomaly, the gravitational wobble. Modern astronomy inferred the existence of Sirius B long before seeing it by carefully measuring the slight oscillating motion of Sirius as it was tugged by its unseen companion's gravity. While we used precision instruments to detect this minute perturbation, is it completely impossible that an ultra-disciplined line of observers, passing down exacting records of stellar positions across generations, could have noticed the same subtle effect? Imagine a priest year after year marking the position of Sirius's rising against a specific stone marker on the horizon. Over a decade, he might note an almost imperceptible shift, a slight delay or advance in its position that defied the predictable patterns of other stars. His successor would continue the watch, and after 50 years, the pattern of this tiny wobble might become clear, revealing the orbital period of the invisible object causing it. This would require a cultural commitment to scientific record keeping so absolute that the data becomes a sacred trust, preserved verbatim through song, ritual, and sand drawings. It seems a monumental task, but is it any more incredible than the Dogon's documented ability to preserve other complex knowledge for centuries? Furthermore, their understanding might have been enhanced by a different kind of perception altogether. Many ancient cultures developed profound knowledge through what we might now call pattern recognition on a grand scale, perceiving connections and cycles that our segmented, specialized science often misses. The Dogon worldview is animistic, seeing life force and connection in everything: the stars, the earth, the water, and themselves. This isn't mere superstition. It can be a framework for seeing the universe as an interconnected system. A subtle change in the atmosphere, the behavior of animals, or the quality of light from a star might be noticed and woven into a larger cosmological theory in a way that our technology, for all its power, might filter out as irrelevant noise. Their description of Sirius B as a heavy, metallic seed could be a brilliant metaphorical synthesis of this inferred data, a poetic yet physically accurate model born from intuition and deep contemplation, not from a textbook. This possibility doesn't diminish their achievement, it elevates it, suggesting a different path to the same profound truth, one built on patience, cultural memory, and an unparalleled intimacy with the night sky. This profound mystery surrounding the Dogon and Sirius B has resonated far beyond the fields of anthropology and astronomy, igniting a powerful and transformative conversation within Afrocentric scholarship. For many thinkers and historians within this movement, the Dogon are not merely an intriguing puzzle. they are a potent symbol, a key piece of evidence in a much larger argument about the historical legacy of African civilizations and the systematic biases that have often obscured their achievements. This perspective sees the Dogon not as an isolated anomaly, but as a striking example of an advanced African knowledge system that was sophisticated, self-sufficient, and deeply attuned to the cosmos long before European colonization. The core of this argument centers on a fundamental reevaluation of history. For centuries, Western academic traditions have often presented a narrative where complex scientific and philosophical thought was largely the product of European and, to a lesser extent, Middle Eastern cultures. Sub-Saharan Africa was frequently portrayed as a continent waiting for the light of knowledge to be brought from the outside, a land of timeless tribes without a history of profound intellectual inquiry. The Dogon, with their precise astronomical data, directly challenge this outdated and prejudiced view. Afrocentric scholars argue that the intense skepticism and the immediate rush to find a Western source for the Dogon knowledge, the contamination theory, is itself a symptom of this deeply ingrained bias. The very idea that an African culture could have developed such insights independently is often treated not as a possibility to be investigated, but as an impossibility to be explained away. This has led to a powerful reclaiming of the narrative. From an Afrocentric viewpoint, the focus shifts from asking, how did the Dogon learn this from outsiders? To, what can the Dogon teach us about the potential of indigenous African science? The emphasis is placed on the Dogon's own sophisticated methods of knowledge preservation, their intricate oral traditions, their complex symbolic sand drawings, their architectural alignments, and their ceremonial cycles. These are not seen as primitive rituals, but as a highly refined and effective technology for storing and transmitting information, a system every bit as valid as the written word. The Dogon become evidence that science can take many forms, and that a culture deeply connected to its environment and the cosmos can arrive at profound truths through observation, deduction, and spiritual contemplation over immense periods of time. This perspective also encourages a broader look at the African continent's historical contributions to knowledge. Afrocentric scholarship often connects the Dogon to other great African civilizations, suggesting they may be the inheritors or distant relatives of a much older, pan-African cosmological understanding. The celestial knowledge of the Egyptians, who also revered Sirius and aligned their pyramids with precise astronomical accuracy, is frequently cited as part of this continuum. The argument posits that the Dogon might represent a surviving branch of this ancient intellectual tradition, one that persisted in its pure form due to their geographical isolation, while other centers of knowledge were disrupted by invasion, colonization, and the passage of time. Ultimately, the impact on Afrocentric thought is about more than just rewriting history. It's about restoring a sense of dignity, agency, and intellectual pride. The Dogon mystery serves as a compelling case study that empowers a re-examination of the entire African past, encouraging a view of the continent not as a passive recipient of culture, but as an active, vibrant, and innovative cradle of civilization and scientific thought. It challenges the academic world to expand its definition of what constitutes valid knowledge, and to consider that the most profound truths about our universe might have been discovered not just in laboratories and universities, but also in the sacred ceremonies and oral histories of people who looked at the same stars and saw a different, but no less true, picture of reality. From the pages of anthropological journals and into the bright lights of Hollywood, the Dogon mystery has made a spectacular leap, becoming a beloved trope in science fiction and a cornerstone of alternative history. Its journey into popular culture began in earnest with the publication of Robert Temple's The Sirius Mystery and Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods, which presented the story not as an academic debate, but as a thrilling cosmic whodunit perfectly suited for a public increasingly fascinated with space and ancient secrets. This framing transformed the Dogon people from a subject of scholarly interest into the centerpiece of a compelling narrative about humanity's forgotten past, a narrative that screenwriters and authors were quick to adapt. The core ingredients were irresistible: an isolated tribe, impossible knowledge, and the tantalizing suggestion of visitors from the stars. It provided a ready-made plot that resonated with the cultural zeitgeist of the 1970s and 80s, a time when questions about our place in the universe and the possibility of extraterrestrial life were moving from the fringe into the mainstream. Perhaps the most famous and direct cinematic treatment of the theme is found in the 1978 film, In Search of Ancient Astronauts, based on von Däniken's work, which devoted significant segments to the Dogon, presenting their story with dramatic narration and evocative visuals that seared it into the public consciousness. This was followed by its inclusion in countless documentary series, from Ancient Aliens, where it has become a recurring and foundational piece of evidence, to more sober explorations on channels like the BBC and PBS. Each retelling, whether sensational or serious, introduced the mystery to a new audience, cementing its status as the go-to example for proponents of paleocontact. The visual language of these shows, lingering shots of the majestic Bandiagara escarpment, close-ups of intricate Dogon masks, and animated depictions of the Nommo descending from the heavens, created a powerful and enduring iconography that is instantly recognizable to millions of viewers around the world. Beyond documentaries, the Dogon Sirius enigma has subtly influenced a vast array of science fiction literature and film. While not always mentioned by name, the archetype it represents, the idea that ancient myths hold encoded astronomical truths given by extraterrestrial teachers, permeates the genre. We see its echoes in the core premise of Arthur C. Clarke's 2001: A Space Odyssey, where an alien monolith ignites a leap in human evolution. The concept is explored more explicitly in novels like Philip K. Dick's Volleys, which grapples with the nature of divine knowledge and alien communication. In film, the arrival of benevolent or mysterious teachers who impart wisdom to early humans, a storyline central to movies like Stargate and Prometheus, owes a clear debt to the Dogon narrative of the fish like Nommo arriving in an ark. The mystery provided a template, a seemingly real-world basis for science fiction's most ambitious stories about our origins. The theme has also found a unique home in music, particularly within genres that explore spirituality, Afrocentrism, and cosmic consciousness. Jazz composer and philosopher Sun Ra, who famously claimed to be an alien from Saturn, incorporated themes of ancient African astronomy and cosmic heritage into his work, creating a mythology that parallels the Dogon narrative in its celebration of a celestial identity. The musical collective Parliament Funkadelic, led by George Clinton, built an entire funk opera around the concept of mothership connection, drawing on similar ideas of ancestral knowledge and stellar origins. More recently, hip-hop artists like Rakim and groups like Dirigible Planets have referenced Sirius and ancient astronomical knowledge in their lyrics, using it as a symbol of elevated awareness, historical depth, and a connection to a prestigious African past. In this context, the Dogon story is not a mystery to be solved, but a truth to be celebrated, a source of cultural pride and artistic inspiration that connects the modern African diaspora to a legacy of cosmic wisdom. This widespread adoption into popular culture has had a double-edged effect. On one hand, it has introduced a fascinating anthropological case study to a global audience, sparking curiosity about the Dogon people, their art, and their rich cultural traditions. It has encouraged a broader appreciation for non-Western systems of knowledge and has fueled a legitimate interest in the unsolved puzzles of human history. On the other hand, this popularization often comes at a cost. The nuanced spiritual reality of the Dogon belief system is frequently flattened into a simplistic, ancient astronaut soundbite, reducing a complex culture to a single, controversial data point in a television debate. The human beings at the heart of the story, with their intricate social structures and profound philosophical worldview, can be overshadowed by the more sensational extraterrestrial speculation. Despite this, the enduring presence of the Dogon Sirius mystery in our books, on our screens, and in our music proves its powerful hold on the human imagination. It serves as a modern myth, a story we tell ourselves about the possibility that our history is grander, stranger, and more connected to the cosmos than we ever dared to dream. The quest to unravel the Dogon mystery is far from over, with contemporary researchers employing new methodologies to re-examine this captivating puzzle. Recent anthropological work has shifted focus from seeking a single, grand answer to understanding the dynamic, living nature of Dogon knowledge itself. Scholars are now less interested in proving or disproving the ancient astronaut theory, and more engaged in documenting how Dogon cosmological ideas are evolving in the 21st century. This involves long-term ethnographic studies that prioritize the voices of the Dogon people, recording how younger generations of priests and elders interpret the traditions in a world of smartphones and satellite internet. This nuanced approach reveals a culture in dialogue with its own history, where ancient myths are continually reinterpreted and given new meaning, rather than simply preserved as static relics. The question is no longer just how did they know, but how does this knowledge live and breathe today? Concurrently, astronomers continue to probe the Sirius system with increasingly powerful technology, and each new observation holds the potential to reframe the entire debate. The Hubble Space Telescope has provided our clearest images yet of Sirius B, allowing for precise measurements of its mass and temperature, all of which continue to align with the descriptions recorded by Gryayul and Dietalen. The long-standing speculation about a potential third body, Sirius C, remains a tantalizing frontier. While earlier claims of its detection have not been substantiated, the possibility has not been entirely ruled out. New astrometric studies using data from missions like Gaia, which is mapping the Milky Way with unprecedented precision, are constantly refining our understanding of the system's gravitational dynamics. The existence of a small, faint dwarf star or a large planetary body in a wider orbit would be a monumental discovery, and for many, it would stunningly validate the Dogon's own descriptions of Emmya, the third star in their cosmology. Perhaps the most significant modern development is the application of interdisciplinary approaches that bridge the gap between cosmology and cultural study. Archaeoastronomers are now carefully analyzing the alignment of Dogon structures, not with the assumption of finding advanced observatories, but to understand how their architecture might reflect a symbolic rather than literal mapping of the heavens. The layout of villages, the orientation of shrines, and the design of granaries are being studied for their potential to encode calendrical information or represent mythological concepts. This work moves beyond the binary of ancient astronauts versus contamination and explores a third way, that the Dogon developed a complex and internally consistent model of the universe based on deep, long-term observation, philosophical contemplation, and a unique synthesis of spiritual and empirical thought. Their knowledge may be a brilliant cosmological framework that parallels scientific discovery through a different path of intellectual achievement, making their accuracy less a mystery of source and more a testament to the power of the human intellect to comprehend the cosmos through multiple lenses. This ongoing research ensures the Dogon enigma will continue to fascinate and challenge us, not as a problem to be solved and filed away, but as a perpetual invitation to rethink the relationships between culture, science, and the stars. So where does this leave us after all this time, with all these arguments and theories laid out on the table? The evidence for an inexplicable mystery is undeniably compelling. We have a people isolated for centuries who possessed a detailed data sheet on a celestial object that was utterly invisible to them. Their descriptions of its 50-year elliptical orbit, its tiny but immense density, and its composition of a heavy metal are not vague spiritual metaphors. They are specific, technical, and unnervingly accurate, matching the findings of modern astronomy with a precision that feels intentional. This knowledge was embedded into the most sacred core of their identity, preserved with incredible fidelity through a sophisticated system of oral tradition. The sheer weight of these coincidences, piled one upon the other, creates a pattern that is incredibly difficult to dismiss as mere chance. It challenges the linear narrative of human progress and whispers of a forgotten chapter in our collective history. Yet, the skeptical counter-arguments provide a powerful and sobering dose of Occam's razor. The timeline of Western contact is a crucial and often underplayed factor. The Dogon were not in a vacuum when anthropologists arrived. The possibility that this knowledge was shared, intentionally or not, by missionaries, teachers, or soldiers, and then seamlessly woven into their existing Sirius-centric beliefs, is a profoundly human and well-documented process of cultural exchange. The psychological explanation for how a fascinating fact can be absorbed, sanctified, and its source forgotten within a generation is equally convincing. Furthermore, the lack of any clear, corroborating evidence from other ancient cultures that supposedly shared this knowledge, like the Egyptians, leaves a significant gap in the more exotic theories. The simplest explanation is often the correct one, and here, the simplest explanation is that we are witnessing a fascinating, if accidental, fusion of modern science and ancient myth. Perhaps, then, the true lesson of the Dogon is not about proving one side right or wrong, but about understanding the very nature of knowledge itself. This story holds up a mirror to our own desires and biases. We see in it what we want to see. For some, it is a thrilling validation that the universe is stranger and more wonderful than we know, a promise that our history is not a closed book but an epic still being written. For others, it is a cautionary tale about the power of interpretation, the ease with which we can project our own frameworks onto other cultures and mistake symbolic truth for literal fact. The Dogon enigma is a Rorschach test for our relationship with the unknown. It reveals our deep yearning for connection, for a sense that we are not alone, and that the cosmos might hold intelligences, whether human or otherwise, that have walked this path before us. This incredible story, stretching from the cliffs of Mali to the depths of space, ultimately transcends the debate over its origins. It endures because it speaks to something fundamental within us, a boundless curiosity about who we are and where we come from. It is a testament to the power of human observation, the resilience of cultural memory, and the enduring magic of a star-filled sky. Whether the Dogon knowledge came from the Nommo, from a forgotten genius under an ancient sky, or from a chance conversation with a visitor from another world, it has gifted us with a mystery that continues to inspire wonder, debate, and a deeper appreciation for the incredible diversity of human thought. And so we turn this over to you. What do you believe lies at the heart of this story? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. We are genuinely fascinated to hear how this incredible historical enigma